Mindy Kessler. Come on up. Mindy is neither Southern nor Yankee, but has from the great and wild Pacific Northwest, making her way to Nashville after many years in New York City. I'm thinking we have a theme there. Where she graduated from the National Shakespeare Conservatory. Creative outlets include writing, acting, and cooking. She can whip up a mean pot of chili, and she has the blue ribbons to prove it. And her story, which is beautiful, is titled Qweeche.
Thank you. Thank you for including me. I really appreciate it. So, when I was 14, my parents got divorced. When I was 15, my mother came home one day and announced to my 3 younger siblings and I that she had met someone. They had decided to get married, and by the way, we were all moving to Kansas from Oregon, where we had grown up and where all of our friends and all of our family and everything that was familiar to us happened to be located. And a few weeks later, a giant U-Haul truck was backing into our driveway in Pendleton, Oregon, and it was driven by this rather hairy gentleman who struck me at the time as a sort of like Waylon Jennings, George Jones with a little bit of Gomer Pyle, hillbilly hybrid guy. And his name was Gail, and he was apparently going to be my new stepdad. So I started high school halfway through my 10th grade year in Emporia, Kansas, and it sucked in every imaginable way. I hated it. I didn't connect with anyone. I did not want to connect with anyone. And shortly after getting there, I figured out how to avoid the whole torture chamber area known as the high school cafeteria by just skipping lunch altogether and going to the library, where I would look through magazines for recipes that I would then painstakingly transcribe onto notebook paper. It's a great way to not talk to anybody. And then in the evenings, a few evenings a week, usually when my mother worked, she was a nurse, I would test out these recipes, like the kitchen was my science lab. And in these experiments, I was really interested in feeling like I was not in Kansas. So I chose recipes that I felt at the time were pretty fancy. So I would make crepes, I made fruit salads stacked into fancy fruit, like cube formations. I made challah bread that I then fashioned into nutmeg-dusted French toast, and I made stuffed mushrooms, and I made gourmet macaroni and cheese. And sometimes the recipes I worked from didn't have a picture, and so I kind of enjoyed that extra challenge of trying to make something I'd never even heard of, and had no visual cue from which to work, so like Qweeche. Qweeche, fuck it, I did it. So Gail was a pretty good sport about just politely eating whatever I said in front of him, even though I know for a fact that he found a lot of it to be, and I quote, weird. Not that I cared what he thought, or my mother for that matter, because none of the adults in this scenario seemed to give a crap about my feelings or those of my siblings. So as far as I was concerned, they were just going to have to bear my endless experimentation with a vast array of recipes that called for a liberal application of breadcrumbs or breakfasty items served at 6 p.m. So that's pretty much how my 10th grade year went. And the only bright spot in my schedule was orchestra, which was a creative outlet. It was the only class that I managed to get an A in. And there was a big spring concert, and I was really excited about it. It was literally the only thing at Emporia High School that I had gotten excited about. And I brought it up at the dinner table one night, and of course, my mother couldn't come because she had to work. And of course, my dad couldn't come because he now lived 2,000 miles away from me. And of course, Gail enthusiastically volunteered to take me. And this was not the outcome that I wanted. I wanted my mom or my real dad to show up for my shit. But it was settled. I excused myself from the dinner table and went to my room dramatically and burst into tears. So the night of the concert came, and I was in the bathroom getting ready and just reviewing my second violin parts. And I don't know, resigning myself to the fact that my parents were complete assholes. And I hear Gail from the living room calling out in his voice, just full of enthusiasm, "Come on, we don't want to be late, let's go, we were going to be late." So I come out of the bathroom, and I see him standing in the living room with this goofy look on his face, and he is wearing the worst suit in the history of the world, like ever. It was like 1987 or 88, and the suit was easily 15 years past its fashion expiration date. And P.S., about 2 sizes too small for him at that point. Seriously, it was like pale blue, polyester, probably really elementary. It was terrible. And I was horrified, and I was filled with panic at the idea of being seen in public with him. And but he was so excited, and he's snapping pictures and smiling like a goofball and just talking excitedly about this concert. And I didn't in that moment have the heart to tell him that he looked like a total idiot. So we went to the concert. When we got there, my embarrassment at this situation was immediately deeply intensified by his just clueless, gregarious demeanor. He would just walk up to anyone like he'd known him forever and talk to him, and did. And so we're in the lobby of the auditorium, and I see him lock on to my teacher. And before I can stop him, he makes a beeline across the lobby with his hand out, walks right up to my bespectacled, dignified, tweed-clad orchestra teacher, and shakes his hand and proudly introduces himself as my stepdad, and then he says, "So, you're a musician, right? Well, let me ask you this. What's better than roses on your piano? Tulips on your organ." I can't really tell you what my teacher's reaction was, because in that moment I was too busy hoping that an actual portal to hell would just open in the floor and take me. That did not happen. The show must go on. So we're in the auditorium, and through the whole concert I can see him in my periphery, front and center, of course, just smiling like a big dumb puppy, and snapping pictures, and he's whispering too loud to everyone around him, and laughing in an otherwise hushed auditorium, just having a goddamn great time. And I was so embarrassed, and my 15-year-old disgruntled opinion, he was just doing everything wrong. So shortly after that, while I was still in high school, Gail actually was laid off from the Santa Fe Railroad, where he had worked for many years. And we ended up moving back to the Pacific Northwest, to my great delight. And I was able to finish high school in my hometown with my friends. And 20 years later, many years after we had made that migration back home, Gail was dying of lung cancer, and we were all gathered around his hospital bed in Tacoma, Washington. And at this point, he was pretty weak and had lost a lot of weight, and if you've ever known anyone that's gone through that, the look, his eyes seemed too big for his face. And he hadn't been interested in solid food for a while. By that point, he was very nauseous all the time. But he would drink chocolate milk, and the nurses would always make sure to sneak an extra carton of chocolate milk onto his meal trays. It was very kind of them, but that he would leave otherwise untouched. So we were all sitting around this evening, and the nurse brought in his dinner tray and set it down, lifted the metal dome. And I remember looking at the plate and trying to figure out what it was they were even serving. It just looked disgusting. It was like this weird, globulous, vaguely yellow, vaguely gray mass, accompanied by incinerated green beans and the obligatory hospital jello. And Gail is sort of waking up out of his morphine drip-induced sleep and sits up and he looks at the tray and something registers and suddenly his face just lights up. And he looks at the nurse and with real enthusiasm he says, "Qweeche." And he looks at me, still speaking to the nurse, and he said, "Man, the first time I ever had this, she made it for me." And then he ate every last bite of that horrible hospital quiche like it was filet mignon. And it was the last solid food that he was able to eat. It was his last meal. In Kansas and all the years after, Gail always showed up for my shit with great enthusiasm. And for all my teenage bitching and moaning about real family, it was my goofy, hairy, inappropriate, joke-telling, sometimes embarrassing, sweet stepdad who taught me the real meaning of family. Thank you.